In 1994, an upstart Philadelphia pro wrestling promotion called Eastern Championship Wrestling decided to rebrand as Extreme Championship Wrestling. And in 1995, owner Todd Gordon sold the company to his head booker, Paul Heyman. ECW grew a small but passionate audience by providing access to types of wrestling that weren't as often experienced on the mainstream American scene of the time. Japanese Puro style, Lucha Libre style, as well as a grimier, bloodier, more, extreme style of wrestling than was being seen on regular weekly American television. Their provocative nature became the talk of the business, and their innovations were routinely integrated, copied, and synthesized by the bigger companies, without much in the way of credit, and certainly nothing in the way of compensation. So ECW was perpetually cash-strapped, perpetually bouncing checks, perpetually on the brink of bankruptcy. But the wrestlers believed in Heyman's vision and his passion, and many followed him as far as he could take them. In the spring of 1999, ECW was once again in dire financial straits, but had several irons in several fires. In March, they were able to find a high-interest loan to at least pay back much of what they owed the wrestlers and get momentarily solvent. They were discussing getting a TV deal with TNN, the Nashville network, which was going through their own ungainly rebrand, as discussed on the TNN Motorsports Hardcore Heat episode. Heyman was also looking into licensing out ECW for a video game. Initially, ECW were talking to THQ, but THQ had been ensnared by the World Wrestling Federation to produce WWF WrestleMania 2000. The WWF had recently severed their contract with longtime game development partner Acclaim, who was still looking to remain in the wrestling game business. ECW began talks with them, and agreed in principle for a game after their WWF contract expired, and even had discussions on Acclaim buying a stake in the company. They also were able to sign that TV deal with TNN, ECW's first presence on national television. Things seemed to be looking up for Philly's finest. This, unfortunately, proved to be something of a mirage, as it became clear very quickly that TNN only had interest in ECW as an attempt to secure a lead-in audience for the program they really cared about, Roller Jam. TNN didn't promote ECW at all, and didn't even seem to have considered their provocative philosophy, or how deeply held those beliefs ran, how virulently the company and its followers defended the organization. Executives started interfering and complaining about the objectionable content that was fundamental to the company's reputation. This became such a push and pull order that by the beginning of the year 2000, TNN was openly courting WWF's flagship show, Monday Night Raw. And as a retort, ECW was openly insulting TNN on their TNN-aired programming, crafting a sleazy, villainous management character known as the Network, who wore a TNN-branded badge. TNN and Roller Jam became bigger enemies in the company than any internal characters, and the show began featuring Paul Heyman making occasional out-of-character speeches directly to camera. At the same time, ECW was excited to announce that Acclaim had agreed to a deal, and purchased a 15% stock interest in the company, allowing for another wave of budgetary restitution. In March of 2000, their game, ECW Hardcore Revolution, hit store shelves. The game was a literal, almost one-to-one reskin of Acclaim's previous game, WWF Attitude. The graphics are the same, the structure, the gameplay. The developers simply stripped out the things owned by WWF and plugged in equivalent ECW content instead. The problem is that ECW, for as much as WWF stole from it aesthetically, was a very different company, and had an entirely different personality as an organization, much cruder, grittier, grimier, with looser rules, quirkier presentation, and wilder action. WWF Attitude felt drab and airless even as a presentation of the much more streamlined WWF. So Hardcore Revolution presents an ECW with its soul absolutely drained out. There's almost nothing here that isn't present in Attitude, outside of the literal wrestlers and entrance wall, and I guess a half-assed barbed wire match option. Acclaim has slightly expanded the Create a Wrestler mode, one of the only things worth recommending Attitude for, but ECW's personality, their innovations of novelty and violence, are nowhere to be found. No crowd interaction, no breakaway environmental things, no cart full of plunder or natural-born killers sound-alike playing throughout New Jack matches. It's just Attitude with an ECW sticker slapped on top. And I don't know about you, but I certainly don't dream of being able to play a terrible wrestling game in any context, even if I get to play as Balls Mahoney. The controls especially remain the Achilles heel here. Hardcore Revolution, just like Attitude, lets you perform moves based on complicated button combos. And just like Attitude, Hardcore Revolution is not responsive enough in any way for most of them to work consistently. And certainly not in the heat of battle, with another person hitting you. So it degrades immediately to the same sort of sloppy, aimless slap-and-hug fights that matches in Attitude routinely boiled down to. The absolute antithesis of the ECW ethos. Hilariously, and sorta inexplicably, ECW Hardcore Revolution was a huge hit! The ECW faithful was small, but it was, well, hardcore. And they showed up for basically anything stamped with that branding. The allure of being able to do bad standing toddler kicks as Chris Chetty or whoever was just too much of a siren song, I guess. But if you've played Attitude, you've played Hardcore Revolution. And absent of the things that make ECW interesting or unique, there's just absolutely nothing to the game. I gave it an hour mostly out of obligation. I remembered playing it for an extremely short time growing up, and switching it on as an adult, I remembered immediately why my experience with this game was so brief. Amusingly, ECW's peak years sorta mirror the Dreamcasts in a few key ways. They both had their peaks around the turn of the millennium. Both were innovative and influential in ways that would have impacts on their business for many years to come, but they individually were woefully mismanaged, burning bright for an extremely short amount of time, before flaming out entirely, neither really making it to 2002. But Hardcore Revolution sold well enough that, against all odds, we will see Extreme Championship Wrestling on the Dreamcast files again one day. Hardcore is forever, even when it's bad. Long live EC***Dub. Next time, watch out for kitties.